Today we are going to look at this video from a channel called Brit Monkey called Georgism 101. No one suggested this video particularly, but I've gotten a few requests over the last few weeks to talk about Georgism. People wonder what my thoughts are on Georgism. And so I'm going to look at this video. Now, this is obviously a second-handed approach to Georgism. I'm getting this information second-handed. So if you're a Georgist, and if you don't think this video accurately represents Georgism as a political idea, as an ideology, then take it up with this video, okay? I'm only responding to what's in this video. If this is not a proper representation of Georgism, not my fault. All right, let's check this out.
Is naturally occurring, necessary for life, and available. The air we breathe is naturally occurring, necessary for life, and available to everyone, regardless of race, gender, social class, politics, or country of origin. Nobody should have to pay to breathe air, because nobody invented air. Sounds reasonable, right? So why can't the same be said for land? Land, like the air, is natural, necessary for life, available to everyone, and invented by nobody. So why do you pay to live on it? Assuming you do pay, given YouTube's demographics and the current housing market, you probably pay rent to a landlord instead of owning your own home. But anyway, seeing as though land is just as natural as air, why should people be allowed to wall some of it off and charge you to live on it?
Well, I think there's a huge difference between land and air. And you can't just go outside, go out into the commons and go around and, people can't stop you from breathing because then they're going to choke you to death and then they're going to get charged with manslaughter or murder or whatever. But even if you own land,
It'd be like owning a patch of air.
Yeah, even if you own land, you would still own the air above the land. So
this is the philosophy of Henry George.
Henry George,
an American economist who lived from 1839 to 1897. Henry George saw that a lot of people were getting really rich off extracting value from the land.
Hell yeah.
Whether it be through being a landlord or from mining.
There are other ways, obviously. You can farm, you can grow produce, you can operate a business on your land to extract value.
Surely, as nobody invented land, it should equally belong to all members of society.
Land should belong to equally all members of society. You hearing that?
From mining. Surely, as nobody invented land, it should equally belong to all members of society.
Yeah, you hear that, guys? Where have we heard this idea before? All land should be collectively owned, should belong to everyone equally in society? Where have we heard that before?
Like the air we breathe. If you want to live on the land, wall it off, and call it your home, you should expect the rest of society to respect that. Therefore, you should pay a tax on the value of the land you are trying to claim to pay for that protection from society. Because other people now don't have access to the land, they should be compensated for it.
Now that other people don't have access to the land, they should be compensated from this. You getting this, folks? Land should belong to all members of society equally, and the purpose of taxes is to compensate people who now don't have access to your land. Imagine putting these ideas in one of the founding documents, like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, that all land belongs to all members of society, and the purpose for levying taxes is to compensate people for being deprived access to the land. Which, by that standard, it would not be hard to extend that to all material goods in society, because where else do the resources come to make these material goods? All land belongs to all members of society, which ultimately means that your land does not belong to you. And the more value you extract, the more value you create using the land, then the more the state gets to take from you. Now, I think Henry George somewhat reverses cause and effect here, in that value is derived from land and resources, when value is ultimately derived from the mind, from creative work, from production, and the right to the consequences of using your mind, of production, of creativity. That's something that some people may call private property rights.
You're goddamn right.
Which I think are a requirement for freedom, for living free, for taking the actions necessary for your own survival and the pursuit of your own happiness. Think about if you were to go to Staples. I've used this example before, but think about if you were to go to Staples or a place like Office Depot and you were to buy a ream of paper and maybe some ink in the form of ink pens. You can probably get a ream of paper and a pack of ink pens for about $10. The resources alone are about $10. And that's all it's worth on the market. It's $10. Now, say you were to take that ream of paper and that ink, which are only worth $10, you could take those resources and you can make it worth millions of dollars. If you're a creative person, like a J.K. Rowling or a Stephen King or an Ayn Rand, you can take a ream of paper and some ink, which are worth $10, and you can turn it into, make it worth millions of dollars by writing compelling novels. But a Georgist, he would see the added value you've added to the raw resources of just ink and paper. A Georgist may try to take credit for this achievement, for they let you use the raw materials to create that value in the first place, which apparently belong to the rest of society.
Blow it out your ass.
And if you use the raw materials to create value, then suddenly, according to Georges, you suddenly owe the rest of society some of the value added, which is just a ridiculous notion.
That's just not smart.
Now apply this principle to land value taxes. If you use the land to create value, like farming or mining or renting to tenants, although as you'll see in this video is pretty, whoever made this video is pretty anti-landlord, which we'll get into that. So I guess you can't rent out to tenants, but just operate any sort of business. Then suddenly you owe society the value added because they let you use the land in the first place. Didn't Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks try to apply this wonderful idea of collectivizing all land, make sure all the land is owned equally by members, all the members of society, and that all value extracted from the land can be seized to be given to other people? Didn't Lenin and the Bolsheviks try to apply this wonderful idea to the kulaks and other attempts to collectivize agriculture in communist Russia? How did that turn out, folks, huh? Land does not belong to you, and if you use it to create value, then you owe society some money, or maybe a lot of money. Either way, this is not a premise to build a free society on, folks.
Land in the big cities is worth a lot, and landowners there will be taxed more. But land in the middle of nowhere is worth very little, so farmers won't be affected all too much. Henry George believed that a land value tax should be implemented on all land across the United States,
And land value, not property tax, a land value tax.
and replace all other taxes, like income tax or tariffs on imports. After the wealth was used to fund the government, whatever was left from that tax is to be shared out to society in the form of a citizen's dividend.
Citizens' dividend, which is just a fancy way of saying wealth redistribution. And here's a thought. So say this is a more efficient way of collecting revenue for the government for the proper functions, military, police, justice system. Let's say it's a more efficient way, and there's, after, collecting all of the taxes, the land value taxes, let's say there is a significant surplus. Why not just roll that over into the next budget for the next year and then reduce land taxes accordingly going forward? I think we know why, because if you notice, what's really appealing to the host of this video? What's most appealing is that land taxes, that land should be collectively owned, and that land value taxes should be used to redistribute wealth, and as you'll see, landlords are the devil.
This solves 4 problems he believed was
Solves 4 problems.
hindering progress and keeping people in poverty.
It's not about justice, it's about solving problems, using the force of government to solve problems.
Number 1, income taxes. People would no longer need to give away what they have worked hard to earn to pay for the work of the government. Only the rich landowners would pay for services.
Only the rich landlords? I thought he said all landowners would pay for services. But here's the thing. Maybe it is true that taxing land value is less disastrous than taxing income directly. I don't know. But it's still a cost you would have to pay, and it would be impossible for you to avoid. You see this happening somewhat in Texas, where you often hear about how Texas, they have no state income taxes, but Texas does rank high as one of the Texas, out of all the states in America, has one of the highest property taxes in the union. So in Texas, it is true that the state government is taking less of your income, but on the other hand, you have to pay the government more in property taxes to avoid having your house seized. On top of that, all businesses that operate on land will have to pay this tax and will probably pass that on to the consumers. I often get asked, what's your favorite tax? Which is the best way to tax? Should we get rid of all taxes and just go toward a VIT? Should we just go toward tariffs? Should we just have a capital gains tax, a gas tax, a land value tax? Tax. It's ultimately a debate over pick your poison. Because any tax, any way you tax, you're going to have consequences. When I think the focus should really be on reducing government to its proper role, which is the protection of individual rights and property rights, and is definitely not trying to find the best way to shake down society so that we can redistribute all the wealth, which is what this video implies.
2. Landlords. As the land
Here we go.
value is now no longer determined by the landlord, landlords cannot artificially inflate the value of the land in order to make a profit.
Oh no, you guys, landlords might make profits. Inflate the value of... Did he say that? They can't just inflate the value of the land?
Determined by the landlord, landlords cannot artificially inflate the value of the land.
Aren't landlords often responding to market forces? A landlord cannot just arbitrarily jack up prices if there's no demand to meet it. I know because I've tried many times. I'm joking. No, okay. So I think this is a reason why Airbnbs become so controversial in some regions, particularly Southern California, because in many situations, homeowners who were formerly landlords, finally they had this new way of using their property. And many people, many homeowners suddenly decided that they'd probably make more money if they used Airbnb to rent out short-term rather than use it for long-term leases. It's not like landlords just suddenly jacked up the rates and then Airbnb came in to fill that demand. And if nobody meets the demand of the landlords, then the landlords will have to price accordingly. But you're going to see a lot of this. There's a lot of anti-landlord rhetoric. And I'm just speculating here, but I think a reason why so many people hate landlords is because landlords have taken a product, a service, which is viewed by many as a human right, a basic need, housing, shelter. It is not a human right, but it is, you do need housing to survive. But landlords have had the audacity to take this basic need, which is housing, and then make a profit off of it. I think that's the reason why people hate landlords. And they're viewed as parasites, as you'll see in this video.
In order to make a profit. The position of landlord will eventually fade from existence.
They'll fade from existence. No more landlords, you guys. No more landlords.
People will be allowed to move freely from place to place without the possibility of rising rents impeding on someone's decision to move.
Now, oddly enough, and I'm not here to dive on grenades for landlords, but he's saying it'll be easier for people to move because landlords won't be jacking up rents, when I think landlords in a lot of ways make it easier for people to move. Because say, if I live in California and I'm under this Georgism paradise where there are no landlords, and I gotta buy my own house for housing, for shelter. Say I want to move to, say, Nevada or Arizona. Well, I can't just, pack up and move because there'd be no place to rent. I'd have to buy a completely new house. Who's going to rent me a house? Landlords don't exist. Hotels presumably don't exist. What is a hotel other than a landlord who just rents out for short-term profits? So I think landlords in a lot of ways make it easier because they are offering a service that I think would be in demand probably under any economic system, and that is temporary housing, short-term, maybe long-term housing, but year to year, month to month. You don't have to, wherever you move, you don't just have to buy a new piece of land and buy a new house, which is oftentimes it can be advantageous to rent rather than own.
Georgists also support the socialization of public transport like railroads.
Yeah, fuck that. You know what? I did, I think about a year ago, I did a whole video on the issue between private and public railroads. And now I remember afterwards, I read, I Googled California train boondoggle. And now I am more vehemently opposed to subsidized railroads than ever. Because I know the history of government subsidized railroads in the 19th century with the Union Pacific, the Central Pacific, and how much of a disaster they were, and how James J. Hill, he privately financed his railroad. He took better care of it, and it was a lot more profitable, a lot more durable. But then on top of that, I read about the history of California. You see it right here. California's high-speed rail is the very definition of a boondoggle.
No surprise there.
See it right here. The California high-speed rail project has often been derided as a boondoggle with good reason. After narrowly winning a statewide vote in 2008 with a low-balled cost estimate and exceedingly optimistic, some would say deceitful and fraudulent, assumptions and not releasing the business plan until after the election, the proposal has quickly changed when reality set in for years has borne the resemblance to the system promised for voters. Goes on to say, in an apt description for a high-speed rail project that has been plagued from the start with fanciful assumptions and the inability to identify a funding source for the vast majority of the project, cost estimates quickly ballooned from $40 billion to $45 billion to $98.5 billion.
No surprise there.
Then down to $68.4 billion after abandoning end-to-end dedicated high-speed tracks in favor of sharing rails with freight and local trains at both ends of the system, thereby making a trip between Los Angeles and San Francisco in the mandated 2 hours and 40 minutes virtually impossible. The San Diego and Sacramento segments were soon placed on the back burner, despite promising voters that they would have high-speed train service. Current cost estimates are around $79 billion, and the completion date has been pushed back by another decade.
No surprise there.
So, I guess under Georgism, if you're James J. Hill and you build a successful railroad using your own money, then let's just take it over so people have an inalienable right to train service,
allowing free movement of people. Number 3, debt. Whatever is left of the land value tax revenue after the government is fully funded should be split up and given back to the people equally. This means that those poor in society benefit more from the citizens' dividend.
Yeah, again, the people who own land, the people who don't own... We're going to take money from the people who own land and give it to the people who don't have land. Where have we heard this before?
Really makes you think.
Oh, but Henry George predates Karl Marx by decades.
Blow it out your ass.
4. Inefficiency.
Inefficiency.
Landowners who simply sit on the land without using it will still have to pay the land value tax, and as they aren't making money off this land, there will be more of an incentive to sell the land to whoever is willing to buy it and make better use of it.
So first off, I don't think this is necessarily about efficiency, but more about trying to force people. Here, listen to that again.
Making money. Landowners who simply sit on the land without using it will still have...
People who don't use the land, just sit on it.
4. Inefficiency. Landowners who simply sit on the land without using it will still have to pay the land value tax.
Still have to pay the tax.
And as they aren't making money off this land, there will be more of an incentive to sell the land to whoever is willing to buy it and make better use of it.
So, here we go. So first off, it's not necessarily about efficiency, but it's more about trying to force people into being productive. Because if they're not developing the land, they're going to have an incentive so that they can make money to pay the tax, or they're going to have an incentive to sell it to someone who might develop on it. Forcing people into being productive. What's another word for forcing people into being productive, folks? And then there's the fact that I think this, you could argue that this might actually discourage development, because if you have undeveloped land with nothing on it, and then suddenly you put a building there, guess what? The value of the land increases, and so does your tax burden. What happens if you build a duplex or some other building on the land in hopes of making a profit, but then you struggle to find buyers? Or you build a duplex that you want to rent out and struggle to find tenants? What happens if you own undeveloped land and don't develop it, and you're not able to afford to pay the taxes, and also cannot find a buyer to buy the land and take it off your hands? I assume then the state will come in and seize your land, and then what? The state seizes it. Now they're not making any money because there's nobody owning the land to pay the taxes. Then what will the state do with it? Will they make it better? Will they develop the land? Will they make productive use of it? With what money? Money that they're going to have to take from other landowners by raising more taxes, which would just exacerbate the problem, exacerbate the situation.
Every single major economist, from Smith to Mill, from Keynes to Friedman, believed that land value tax was the most efficient and fair form of taxation. All these economists observed that taxing people's income or labour deterred them from earning more or working harder. However, taxing land value did not deter people from owning and improving land. This land value tax also extends to the oceans and the air, so polluters have to pay for destroying people's collective property.
Collective property.
But
now, there is something to be said. If polluters pollute land, if they pollute your air, they should be expected to compensate you for that. But notice the package dealing. It's all about collective property.
Extends to the oceans and the air, so polluters have to pay for destroying people's collective property. But how would you determine the value of the air, the land, and the ocean? Land value tax is a progressive tax based on the unimproved value of the land.
Now notice this picture. You got tax and not tax. So this video cannot seem to decide whether or not residential land is going to get taxed. Before, they say, oh yeah, the rich people, because they live on more expensive land, they'll pay a lot of the taxes. In the beginning, they show an animation where there's a house on land and you're walling it off. You have to pay the land value tax. But in this picture, they make it look like that your house is not going to get taxed, just the productive uses, like the farms as seen in the picture. So it looks like if this is true, housing won't get taxed. So then what are they going to tax? Just the land that you use exclusively for productive use? Which they're saying, oh, well, it's going to replace income taxes, which is great because income taxes, they just tax your labor. They tax your work. But instead of doing that, we're just going to tax the land. What land? The land that you use to work, that you use for productive and commercial uses. So if we're just going to switch the income tax with a tax on land that you use for working, how much of a difference is there?
Businesses are regularly assessed for their value by the government anyway, so why not do the same for land? A land value inspector could be a good job for all those landlords.
Yeah, landlords are just parasites, you guys.
You just put out of business. Georgism was immensely popular in the 1800s and early 1900s, with Henry George's manifesto, Progress and Poverty, being the best-selling book of the...
And again, this is just a land tax. It's not a property tax. And I think this is where it gets into another step of how you don't have rights under this system. Like, your property rights are at the mercy of market forces and market demand for your land. So imagine a scenario. You guys remember the movie Happy Gilmore? The movie Happy Gilmore with Adam Sandler? What was one of the big obstacles in that movie? It was when the tax man comes to take away Happy's grandma's house. And this house had a particular sentimental value. Happy's grandfather built the house with his bare hands, built it to his liking. And then, poor grandma fell behind on her tax bills. Tax man was coming to take it, so that's why Happy Gilmore had to go play golf. So, but imagine a scenario where you buy cheap land with a low tax burden, then you build a house. You build your own house that you designed, that you love, the way you like it, and you build it, and it's your house. And then say, decades later, 2-3 decades later, maybe the area around you develops to the point where the value of your land goes through the roof. Or say maybe an oil tycoon discovers that your house is built on oil deposits. And even if you don't sell your mineral rights, the value of your land has gone through the roof, maybe by 3, 4, 5 times. So now they're going to increase your tax burden, and maybe in that context, maybe your income has not went up. So what do you do then? What if it becomes to the point where you cannot keep up with the increased land value and the taxes applied? Especially with this, when this video kind of tries to paint it as, oh, this is better for the poor because they're getting a citizen's dividend, and we're just taking it from the rich. Wouldn't rich people have a leverage in this situation? If you're struggling to pay the taxes that are being applied to you because the value of your land increased, and then if a rich buyer, a rich investor, maybe the oil tycoon, if they notice that you're struggling to keep up with those tax bills, maybe they'll just say, hey, maybe I'll just let the state take their property for me, and then I can buy it at a discount. Then I don't have to get involved with haggling with this guy. Who has the leverage in that situation?
Really makes you think.
The era. Every single progressive leader in the USA until the 1940s was influenced by the book. But
Yeah, that should tell you a lot.
despite containing the idea of socializing all the land and abolishing landlords, Georgism is firmly based in liberalism, where a free market exists and a government to enforce those rights.
Yeah, it's not a free market if society has abolished or established that the principle that all land is collectively owned, and people are not allowed to dispose their property as they see fit, like renting out housing or operating a train at a profit.
Henry George rejected the label socialist.
Well, he certainly was no capitalist, from what it sounds like.
Today, Georgism is worked on and contributed by liberal, libertarian, conservative, socialist, and anarchist economists and philosophers.
Yeah, sounds like a lot. It's loved by a lot of goons.
All sides joining forces to create one centrist liberal system. Beautiful. Since the 1940s, Georgism
Because
has
that's what all those groups want. They want a centrist system. Like the anarchists, what are they? The anarchists and the communists?
been contributed by liberal, libertarian, conservative, socialist, and anarchist economists.
Yeah, socialists and anarchists, what they want is centrism. They just love compromise and being in the middle.
And philosophers. All sides joining forces to create one centrist liberal system. Beautiful. Since the 1940s, Georgism has been mostly dormant aside from a mention in an episode of The Andy Griffith Show, but since the financial crash and the annihilation of the housing market, ideas like land value tax and universal income have all come back into the public view in an attempt to solve the crisis. Most modern Georgists don't think that a land value tax should completely replace every form of taxation revenue. That would be impossible.
Yeah, that would be impossible. I agree.
Instead, ideas vary from using it to replace property tax, VAT, or income tax.
Yeah, only the major taxes, especially income taxes. It would be impossible. Especially in today's mixed economy with the generous welfare state, with the existence of programs like Social Security and Medicare. Good luck building a movement to replace income tax with land value taxes when, especially when retirees, probably a lot of retirees relying on low tax property that they paid off and untaxed SSI to survive. Good luck.
It all depends on how progressive the tax is. This theorizing is all well and good,
Probably have to amend the Constitution.
but are there any examples of land value tax at work? Well, yes. Unlike other
So I guess there have been some examples of Georgism working.
is.
By what standard? Who the fuck knows?
This theorizing is all well and good, but are there any examples of land value tax at work? Well, yes. Unlike other radical solutions, Georgism has been tried at...
So you notice that
Are there any
hammer and
examples
sickle
of
show up?
land value tax at work?
Is this guy a communist? I don't know.
Well, yes. Unlike other radical solutions,
Yeah, flash of the hammer and sickle.
Georgism has been tried and is successful.
So notice what he's doing here. He's saying he goes from land value taxes to Georgism.
Value tax at work depends on how progressive the tax is. This theorizing is all well and good, but are there any examples of land value tax at work?
Land value tax at work.
Well, yes.
Yes.
Unlike other radical solutions, Georgism has been tried and is successful.
Georgism. So he goes from land value to... See, what he's about to do, he's about to give some examples of countries and a city that have had a land value tax as examples of Georgism, when they're not. They might have land value tax, but they do a lot of other things that make it far from a Georgist society.
In Singapore, probably the most famous case, all of the land is owned by the government, and those with valuable land pay up to 16% of that value in tax. In fact, land is so efficiently used in Singapore that homelessness is virtually non-existent, and
Yeah, so homelessness is not existent. I didn't really see that much in the video that, oh, Georgism is going to erase homelessness. What we were promised were citizens' dividends and an elimination of landlords. Not to mention, I think Singapore has other taxes. There's a lot of things Singapore does right from what I know. I think it's a relatively free market economy. And from what I've seen, they don't have citizens' dividends. They don't have UBIs. And because I just did a quick Google search, and I imagine, given all of the people with a huge boner for UBI and all the Yang gangers, if Singapore had a UBI program that was not a disaster, I probably would have been met with thousands of blogs and videos and op-eds about how wonderful Singapore is. Couldn't find anything about Singapore having a citizen's dividend, though. And I think landlords still exist in Singapore.
most homeless people sleep.
But because they apply a land value tax, I guess that's Georgism.
To avoid the morning traffic, which is a whole other issue. Denmark has a 3%
Denmark.
on all land worth over $343,000.
So there's another Georgia's paradise with a variety of other taxes besides land value taxes.
Which seems low.
I don't think they have UBI, and I'm pretty sure landlords probably exist in Denmark. They have not been phased out in Denmark.
But still encourages efficient use of the land. Detroit in the 1890s had a land value tax, which is what originally enticed Henry Ford to build his motor car factory.
Yeah, that was the thing that enticed Henry Ford. He came all the way to Detroit. He came all the way to Detroit, Michigan, all the way from Dearborn, Michigan, where he grew up, to build his automobile plant. It had nothing to do with the fact that he lived near Detroit, grew up near Detroit. The fact that Detroit was a pretty good place for shipping, given that it was right by the Great Lakes and was proximate to natural resources. But also, what do we know about Detroit? Did they have a citizen's dividend back then? Not to mention, yeah, we're talking about Detroit in the 1890s. Was all of the land collectively owned in Detroit, Michigan? In 1890, did they were landlords phased out in the era of land value taxes? But I guess if any place in the world, if they merely have a land value tax, I guess that means Georgism works.